how to use the casual form in Japanese. One of the really big things that trips up learners of Japanese is the casual form or short form of Japanese. And really simply, in Japanese, there are different politeness levels that you can speak in. And there's actually quite a lot of different politeness levels. For example, at the very top, you have Sonkeigo and Kenjogo, which is kind of honorific or humble speech. Then you have just normal polite speech, which is things like des and mas. And then we have this casual form, also known as the dictionary form. And you might see this being referred to as the short form in textbooks like the Genki series, but all this is it's just the baseline form of everything. The very baseline of verbs, adjectives, and nouns without adding any politeness to it. That's why it's known as the dictionary form. Now, many textbooks may teach you the mas form first, but I actually really recommend learning the casual form first, what we're going to be looking at today. This is actually the simplest way of looking at Japanese. For example, ikimasu, to go. This turns into iku. So in this video, we're going to have a look at a whole bunch of different uses of the casual form of Japanese for verbs, e-adjectives, na-adjectives, nouns, both in the present affirmative as well as the present negative. And we'll also have a look at actually how the casual form is used and when you can use it yourself. So before we have a look at how to actually make the short form or casual form in Japanese, it's really important to know how and when this is actually used. So you may have learnt in your textbook that you must use the mas form, you must use polite speech, but in reality, you will see this casual form, the short form, all over the place, especially in things like anime, dramas, video games, manga, and also in real life, especially when you talk with friends and family. And this is because actually the polite form that you get taught in textbooks is actually less used than this form, the casual form. And the reason why is because when you speak politely, imagine that you're sitting in an interview or talking with your boss. You kind of want to put off a nice impression, right? You might speak a little bit more politely and a little bit less slangy, right? Because you want to be a bit more polite. In a way, you're not really being your true self. You're kind of putting on this appearance of politeness and properness. And that's how the must form is used. So any situation where you want to look very proper and polite, that's when you use the must form. For example, talking with your boss, talking with someone you're not familiar with, someone that you're not friends with, right? That's when the must form is used, the polite speech. So what does that mean? That means in any situation where you're talking with friends, family, or you're looking at media where people are talking that aren't in this polite situation, you're much more likely to see this casual form.
それじゃあ私行くね。私もう寝るわ。おやすみ。
僕くん、晩ご飯楽しみにしてる?
So I think it's a great disservice for textbooks to not be teaching you this form at the very beginning instead of the must form. Perhaps the reason why is because all of these schools want students speaking politely to everyone, but it actually comes across a little bit more distant. When you're polite to someone, you're kind of distancing yourself, right? You're not showing them your true self. And it's the same thing in Japanese. So if you want to get kind of closer to someone, you should actually be using this form, the more casual form.
広瀬一家の連中は But
if you're talking to strangers, you might use the polite form. So for example, if you were to ask your friend, where are you going? You wouldn't really say, どこに行きますか?
どこに行きますか?
It sounds very robotic. どこに行きますか? Sounds very distant and polite. Instead, if you want to be close to your friend and show that you're not putting on this veil of politeness, you're better off saying, どこに行く? Where are you going?
さあ、行かなくちゃ。
どこに行く?
さあ、そんなことより次はどこに行く? お姉ちゃんはここを出てどうするの? どこに行くの?
This is a more casual way of speaking, and casualness is, in a way, friendliness. In fact, I actually very rarely use the must form in my daily life in Japan. I think as an Australian, I kind of want to be close to people. I don't want to kind of be fake and distant. I kind of have this kind of more buddy-buddy closeness, right? And I kind of want to connect with people. I don't want to be distant. So I actually find myself talking in casual Japanese almost all the time. I very rarely use the must form unless I'm really wanting to be polite to someone, like I'm going to like the city hall or a police officer or something like that. Most situations with my neighbors, friends, family, even taxi drivers and things like that, I'll just use casual Japanese. And this isn't seen as rude. This is completely 100% normal. This is just being a bit friendlier. Be careful though, sometimes some Japanese people might not see your relationship that way, and you talking in casual Japanese is kind of implying that you guys are friends or close, and they might actually be like, huh, why are you talking to me that way, right? This is sometimes happens in Japanese culture, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you feel like you're on a good enough relationship to someone to call them their first name or even a nickname, definitely you should be using the casual form. But if you might feel like you should use like a Mr. or Mrs. when addressing someone, or if they're really someone above you that you really want to be polite to, then that's when you should use the must form, the polite form. So first up we have verbs. Now, you may have learnt the must form first, the polite form, and all you have to do is just turn, for example, ikimasu, to go,
あ、じゃあ一緒に行きます？
into 行く。
私、先に行くから。
なあ、おい、一人で行くなって。あったく、俺らも行くぜ。
これから会いに行く。
If you've learnt the must form first, you may need to kind of backwards engineer your brain to go back to the dictionary form. It's actually a little bit more complicated this way, but that's okay, don't worry. First, you need to know the classification of a verb. So for example, maybe you've learnt the ru and u verbs, or my recommended way, ichidan and godan. If you don't know how to do that yet, then check out this video above and that'll teach you how to actually conjugate verbs and categorize them in the first place. But generally speaking, there are two different types of verbs. You have ru verbs, also known as ichidan. They're the most simplest. You just drop the ru and then conjugate it however you want. Taberu, tabemasu. So they're incredibly simple, and the same thing works here when we're looking at the polite form and the casual form. For example, mimasu, the polite way to say to look.
あなたはこのカムロ町という町を何と見ますか?
Well, the casual form is just miru.
この傷を見るがいい。私が母親となった証拠だ。
See how you just drop the mas and replace it with ru. That's the simplest type of verb, and this is known as an ichidan, one stage, or a ru verb. The more complicated one is known as the u verbs, or the godan. That means there's 5 stages of conjugation. This is a little bit more complicated, but good news, if you're turning the polite speech into casual speech, all you're really doing is you're looking for the i sound. Like for example, nomimasu, the nomimasu.
お茶でも飲みますか？
Kikimasu.
そうですね。何かあったら聞きますよ、ジェファソン先生。
That e sound, all you have to do is just change that e into an u sound. For example, nomimasu, nomu.
お前と飲むのも久しぶりだ。
Kikimasu, kiku.
あなたなら聞くことができる。
So pretty straightforward for ru verbs or ichidan verbs. Just drop the mas and replace it with ru. Mimasu, miru. Tabemasu, taberu. For godan or u verbs, it's a little bit more complicated. Just change the i sound into an u sound. So instead of ikimasu, the i in ikimasu, to go, it's iku. The ki turns into a ku. Now, congratulations! If you understand this, you've pretty much overcome the most difficult part of polite and casual speech from the mas into just the dictionary form, because the remainder things like adjectives and nouns are super simple. To change adjectives and nouns into more casual speech instead of polite speech, this really just revolves around des. Des makes things polite. So for example, you could say, kawaii desu. That is cute.
かわいいですよね、バニッシュ。
All you have to do to make this casual is just drop the des. Kawaii.
かわいいだろ。
And the same thing for na adjectives, for example, 大切な人 or 大切です。
こんな時こそ規律が最も大切です。
That's the polite way of speaking. If you just want to make it casual, just drop the des and replace it with da.
金よりもお前の方が大切だ。
So instead of taisetsu des, it's taisetsu da. And the exact same thing with nouns. Instead of something like gakusei desu, I am a student,
私はそういう人間です。
you could just say gakusei da, I'm a student.
貴様もドクターゲロの作った人造人間だ。
This just makes it a more casual way of speaking. So verbs are definitely the most tricky part here with kind of polite and casual speech. As you can see, e-adjectives and na-adjectives and nouns are super simple. It just revolves around the des and da. Just be careful though, as e-adjectives, you do not put da at the end. E-adjectives simply finish the way they are, without adding da. This is because e-adjectives actually already kind of contain the meaning of da to be already in them. Kawaii doesn't mean cute, it actually means is cute. And that's why you can't say kawaii da, because that would be is cute. It really doesn't work. So just be careful with e-adjectives. You don't add da at the end of e-adjectives, but you do for na-adjectives and nouns. Cool, so you now know how to make verbs, adjectives, and nouns into the casual form. If you want to know now how to do this with the negative form, for example, ikimasen, I do not go.
私はもうどこにも行きません。
Well, in order to turn this into the negative, now you need to change, remember the I sound for the mus stem? Now you need to make it an A sound and then add nai. So instead of ikimasen, it's ikanai. Ikimasen, ikanai.
どうして助けに行かない？
You just change the I into an A sound and then add nai. That's how you make godan or u verbs into the casual form. And the same rule applies that we looked at before with the really easy ru verbs or ichidan verbs. Again, you just replace the mas with nai. That's it. Tabemasu, tabenai.
でも僕は忘れませんから。何があったって忘れない。
Mimasu, minai.
ジェダイは悪夢は見ない。
And so to turn casual forms or short forms into the nai form, it's super simple. Just drop the ru in ru verbs or ichidan verbs, so taberu, tabenai. And then for u verbs or godan verbs, you just change the u sound. For example, kiku, kaku, nomu. You just change that u into a sound and then follow with nai. Kiku, kikanai. Nomu, nomanai. Iku, ikanai. And again, good news, e-adjectives and nouns are super simple. Again, it revolves around the des and the da. So for example, big, oki desu. Ano Pokemon, oki desu. That's the polite way of speaking. If you want to make that polite form into the negative, okikunai desu.
全然怖くないですよ。
So the polite way of saying it's not big. Well, again, you may already guess, just drop the des and now you have casual. Okikunai, it's not big.
威力自体はさほど大きくないってこと？
Just be careful of the exception for E, good. This is actually yokunai.
ストレスは美容に良くないですよ。
こっちのが良くない？
The reason why is because the adjective E was actually originally said as yoi, and that's why you have to conjugate it in that way. So yokunai, yokunai desu. So yokunai desu, the polite way of saying it's not good, simply yokunai, the casual way to say it's not good. And the same thing with na adjectives. You would have, instead of janai desu,
なんか嫌じゃないですか。
you would just have janai.
サボテンは好きじゃないよ。
Like here in Persona 5, iya janai desu, or ski janai. And the same thing with nouns, it's just noun janai desu.
って今すぐに赤ちゃん欲しいとかそうじゃないですよ。
Turns into noun janai.
いいえ、それだけじゃない。私は一人じゃない。
So as you can see, the casual form isn't too difficult. For the most part, it's really just between using des and not using des. With verbs and e-adjectives, you just use the base form, iku, kawaii, super simple. And then for na adjectives and nouns, you just add da at the end, to be, it is. This is kind of a casual form of des, da. Now, there are a few things you need to be careful of. For example, when you ask a question, you may have learnt that you should add desu ka or masu ka at the end to make something a question. For example, doko ni ikimasu ka? Well, in casual Japanese, you can just drop the desu ka to make it a question. So you can just use it all by itself. Doko ni iku? Where are you going?
さあ、そんなことより次はどこに行く?
You can still use the ka particle after ni iku.
彼の墓に参りに行くか。お前どうする？一緒にどっか行くか。
However, this makes it a very direct question because the ka particle is making a very direct question. And this isn't something you'll see actually being used in real life because it's a little bit too forceful and direct. Instead, it's something you might see when a character is making a very direct question in like an anime or a game, for example. Or for example, like making a suggestion, like let's go together.
さて、じゃあ行くか。
Also, another thing to be careful of is that you can use da instead of des.
とても元気だ。
But actually, you don't use it too much in like casual spoken language. And the reason why is because da is a very strong declarative way of saying something. It is, right? It's quite strong and forceful. So if you said, for example, 学生だ, it feels like you're really, really strongly saying, I'm a student. You could just say 学生. You don't actually have to have the da at the end. So for example, if someone asks you, are you okay? Genki, you could say, Genki.
博士は元気?
You don't need to say, Genki da. No. You can just say Genki. Using da makes it really feel like you're exclaiming it is. Like when you're pointing out something, like you're really being emphatic, like, there's a fire! Kaji da!
リリーの家が火事だ。村人はそう叫んでいる。
You could just say, oh, Kaji, there's a fire. But if you want to really exclaim, Kaji da! Omae da!
犯人はお前だ。
犯人はお前だにゃ。
バカはお前だ。
どこだ?
待てよ。フリーザはどこだ？
オラの息子はどこだ?
So really exclaiming something. But you definitely see it used in anime and video games and things like that because there's a lot more dramatic moments where you're like, oh, there's a fire! It was you! That type of thing. Da is really exclaiming something. And so da by itself isn't often used in kind of daily conversation. However, it's definitely used when you're trying to point something out. Like, oh, there's a fire. Kaji da. Or, oh, it's raining. Ame da. Or, hey, there's Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise da. So you could just use the noun by itself. 私は学生. I'm a student. You don't have to say 私は学生だ. If you do that, it makes it very strong. However, you can actually follow the da with some other particles to actually change the feeling of the sentence.
そうだね。そうだよね。やってみるよ、ひまり。
We'll be covering this a little bit more in some other videos, but just for example, some common particles that follow da that you often see both in normal speech as well as anime and drama. For example, だね.
なんでもない。いい名前だね。アーロン。あんた本当にオカルト話好きだよね。
This is the same as ですね. And this is kind of getting confirmation. For example, 彼は学生だね. He's a student, right?
よく来たな、ヒーローの卵たち。
元気そうだね。
当たり前だ。
And you also might see, for example, だよ.
私、ケンちゃんのこと大好きだよ。もちろん料理も大好きだよ。
カイトはどうだ？元気でやってるか？元気だよ。
This is the same as ですよ. And this is when you're trying to be a little bit more convincing. Like 便利だよ. It's really convenient.
あいつはまだ学生だよ.
It's kind of a convincing tone. So just to recap to make things really clear, you could just say 好き to like.
もちろんこのお花も大好き。
So saying 好き is just I like it. If you say 好きだ, it's really exclaiming I like it.
お母さんは大切だ。今でもずっと大好きだ。
キスナッチのことが大好きだ。大好きだ。
Almost feels like you're kind of yelling it across to someone. I like you! 好きだ! That type of thing. But if you wanted to make it a little bit softer, you could say 好きだよ. I like you.
僕、お花も好きだよ。ありがとう。リュック。大好きだよ。
This makes it a little bit softer. Or if you're going to talk about someone else, you could say, oh, you like that, right? 好きだね. So you're getting confirmation.
私はやっぱ夏が好きだね。
Using these particles after da does make it a little bit softer, so just keep that in mind. Finally, for example, when you're wanting to say yes and no in Japanese, you may have learnt the very normal hai.
ほら、
はい。
行くよ。
はい。はい、わかりました。
Or iie.
いいえ、大丈夫です。いいえ、子供たちを探す方が先ですわ。
That's a very polite way of saying yes or no. But in casual Japanese, instead of hai, you would say
ありがとう。
いい子にしてるのよ。
傷は大丈夫。もう痛くないよ。
And instead of iie for no, you would say
大丈夫よ。私にはアディオがいるもの。私もあなたのことそう呼んでたの？あなたはまだ小さかったから。
hai, yeah, So just be careful because it's very, very similar, right? Is like very short, yes. Is no. It's a double and then That's how you say no. Another little added thing is sometimes in casual Japanese, you don't actually have to say the full sentence because it's already implied what you're talking about. It's already understood. For example, instead of saying something wa dou desu ka?
気分はどうですか?
How is it? You could just end with the wa particle. Dun 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 wa?
これは
あなたは?
So let's say, for example, you're asking someone how their day was. You could say, 今日はどうでしたか? That's kind of a polite way of talking. Well, in casual Japanese, you could actually just say, 今日は, as for today, and it's kind of implied. As for today, dun dun dun, how was it?
君は
私も一緒に行くわ。
君は奴らの仲間ではない。
So there you go, a crash course in how to use casual Japanese. Hopefully this video was helpful for you. I know a lot of people, especially when they start out learning and they go to like schools or they use a textbook, it almost always teaches you the must form first, and it really does make your life so much more complicated because then you have to reverse engineer conjugating things and it's just very complicated. In Japanese, you actually learn the dictionary form first, this casual form, and then later in school, kids will learn how to speak politely. And I actually recommend learning that way. I think it's so much more simply when you look at it like this. So just remember, the casual form is the baseline version. You're not being rude, it's just you're not being polite. That doesn't mean you're being rude, it just means you're being baseline, right? And this just kind of implies a casualness, a closeness with someone. It's not necessarily rude. However, if you want to be polite and you kind of want to be a bit distant and be very careful and polite, that's when you would use the must form and des. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching. Leave a comment down below practicing your casual Japanese, and I'll see you all again in the next video. See ya.